Welcome everyone to the Wednesday edition of the Rosemont Readers and Writers Series here at the Rosemont Writers Retreat. I'm thrilled to be speaking once again with Liz Abrams-Morley, who has been away from the retreat for a few years, but I'm so thrilled to have you back. Liz Abrams-Morley's newest book, Beholder, was recently released by Word Poetry, and Inventory was published by Finishing Line Press in 2014. Her collection, Necessary Turns, was published by Word Poetry in 2010 and won the Eric Hoffer Award for Excellence in Small Press Publishing that year. Liz's poems and short stories have been published in a variety of nationally distributed anthologies, journals, and e-zines, and have been read on NPR. Co-founder of Around the Block Writing Collaborative, she has taught in the Rosemont MFA program and teaches literacy through arts programs to children in K-12 classrooms. Wife, mother, grandmother, and perpetual activist, Liz wades knee-deep in the flow of everyday life from which she draws inspiration and occasionally exasperation. So you can visit her at lizabramsmorley.org. So please welcome Liz Abrams-Morley. I'm going to start with a new question for Liz because I've known Liz for a long time, and I was able to share a really wonderful experience with Liz the day after the inauguration, and I think 4 days after I returned from Sicily, jet-lagged and bleary-eyed. Liz and I and lots of other people, thousands of other people, mostly women, got on buses at 6:30 in the morning in Philadelphia and went down to Washington, D.C. and marched in the Women's March. It was really an incredible experience and something I really wanted to do. And I have to say that Liz and her daughter, who organized our bus, really helped make it possible for me, since I was knee deep in my Sicily excursion with the MFA students. And we had some other Rosemonters there, yes, which was also really great. So I also know that in addition to the marching, you also are part of a group called Tuesdays with Toomey. Mm-hmm. And maybe you could share that experience with everyone and sort of what prompted you to get involved with all of that, and then maybe talk about how all this political activism has kind of seeped into your work.
It's a really interesting question to start with. So Tuesdays with Toomey, or as we are all referring to it now as Tuesdays Without Toomey, because it's been going on for a year and a half. Our Senator Toomey has been in office for close to 3,000 days and has never held a town hall in Philadelphia and has almost never held a town hall in Pennsylvania. This started with a group of very young women who put something on Facebook. I'm going over there on Tuesday to see if I can grab him at lunchtime when he's running out of the building. Anybody else want to come? There's a group of, right after the election, and it was a Tuesday at lunchtime. So I think there were two young women who were nannies, and actually what's interesting is one of the women who has become really the major organizer. She's a nanny for money and writes romance novels. And so she and I have gotten to know each other. It turns out there are a lot of us writers showing up there, a lot of artists. So I started wandering up about a year ago March because Toomey's offices moved to our side of town, and right. My daughter, who has become a total activist and pushes me all the time, said, why don't you go over there? You're free on Tuesday afternoon and you can walk.
Right.
And I started showing up, and honestly, initially for me, it was an opportunity once a week to be with people who made me feel not crazy and not hopeless. But the group organizes and puts out, we bring in speakers. There's a little soapbox. For the first time, about a week ago, I decided I would say yes to being asked to be the MC, which involved riling everybody up, and a couple of people who were organizers knew I wrote poetry and said, why don't you share one of your poems as a way of opening up? So we've now introduced poetry into our meetings. But the question of how the activism and poetry goes together is really interesting to me, because with a slight digression, I was doing a reading. A neighbor of mine put together a book party for Beholder and a few weeks ago, and I asked my daughter to be my introducer. And she had written, partly because she had written a great review on Amazon for me, and she has a different last name, so it didn't look like nepotism. And I said, my son, no, I don't want you to review it. Erica, you review it. You have a different last
Well,
name.
they might not let. I mean,
Yeah.
Amazon's gotten pretty hardcore about that stuff.
So she, but she reviewed, and her review, I thought, had a really, that she made some interesting observations about the poetry. So I was expecting that as an introduction. And what she did was she went through all of my other bios in earlier books and noticed that in this one I added activist. And she said that she really noticed that turn in terms of where my writing was going, but that she wanted the assembled masses to understand that this was really not a turn, a new thing, but a return, and then proceeded to tell everybody that, you probably don't know this about my mom. This is the downside of having a family member do this. But she and my dad met on a bus ride from Madison, Wisconsin to Washington, D.C. to protest the Vietnam War, and they were together on a bus for 20 hours, and that's how they got to know each other. And she's been marching, and basically we were told when we were growing up we could be anything we wanted, and they didn't care gender, race, or anything else of who we decided to partner with, as long as they weren't conservative and argued the wrong politics at the dinner table. So, which I don't remember being quite that unsubtle, but apparently we were. Anyway, so I think that on a certain level, politics has always infused my work, but in a much more humanistic, kind of. I think one of the things that writers can do and artists can do is be the loyal opposition in any government situation, and that particularly, I mean, my poets all heard me saying this the last couple of days, but in particular, that we are in totalitarian countries, artists and the writers and artists and poets were always the dangerous enemies of the state, because we make people feel, and we make them think, and we make them look in the mirror and reach across boundaries, and all of that is stirs up the inability to just make everything black and white, and you have no rights, I have rights. I mean, you can't do that if you start to look at other people.
Right. Right.
So that's a long answer to a short question.
No,
but,
it was a loaded question. I'm not going to lie. The whole situation with Senator Toomey and the way he moved his office too, I think, is something that people maybe not be aware of. His office used to be on Market Street, and it was pretty accessible downtown. Right. And then he moved into the Customs House, which has airport-style security in the building. Right. And he moved there to keep the protesters out of the building. Right. And so he's supposed to be working for us. Right. So I haven't ever come and and done the protest, but I'm really glad you're there, Liz.
Good. Welcome anytime.
Because I just, you're a thorn in his side,
Yes.
and that makes me happy. So,
Well, there was a study that showed that looked at the Twitter accounts of all of the senators, and he got labeled the most hated senator in the U.S. based on the fact that he has the most negative responses to his tweets because we're watching. So being a thorn is kind of my goal.
right, and that's what democracy is supposed to be about, right?
But
that's what freedom of speech is supposed to be about.
Right, and I also think that's what responsible art is also about.
Right.
That's why I said I think it's always been political in some way that I didn't always recognize, because I think, in some ways part of what we're doing is trying to say something about the human condition.
Well, and in that sense, some people would say that all art is political, no matter what your intention is, even if it's just to entertain,
Right.
that it's a political act. All right, enough of that. So,
Okay.
you have also traveled, and I know you take writing groups abroad and do these wonderful things with your Around the Block group. So what's the most inspiring place you've ever been? Do you have a place that's inspiring to you?
Well, it's interesting because obviously I've gotten a chance to watch you ask other people that, so my mind's been going. So I love travel. I love being in new places, but I love really being there. My mother-in-law had been a travel agent and European and thought it was awful that we went back to the same places over and over again, or just settled into a town. I loved taking our writing group, both the two places that I just felt like I was home, when one was in Dublin, which we've been to a couple of times, and just kind of lived there for the time, and the other one was in Cortona in Tuscany, in a B&B, and just in that village. And I was concerned when we first started doing that it would feel like, there's so much else to see. But I love travel that allows you to, sit on the square and watch people and have odd conversations with shopkeepers, and so I think all of those kinds of trips have inspired me. The most unusual one that really stirred me in terms of the landscape and also the religion of the area was when we took a group to Bali. And that I think that was just so different, and the Hindi culture. I mean, Bali's so interesting because it's part of Indonesia, but it's the one island that's not primarily Muslim. It's Hindi, and it just permeates everything. We got our rooms cleaned, and the housekeeping staff would put little offering boxes and incense, and then if your offering box needed refreshing, you'd have a new little lotus flower, when you came in, and it's just spiritually just such it sort of pervades everything. And then we were on the edge of the sacred monkey forest, so the monkeys were also walking all over the place, which was certainly different from my real life. But I will say that the landscape, or the place that most informs my poetry, is the place I go to, which is up on Cape Cod. And I think it's just, it's roots.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you ever get stuck? Do you have a plan if you get stuck?
Do I ever get stuck? No, I always get stuck. So the reason that my two partners and I named our writing collaborative Around the Block Writers Collaborative is because when we came up with this idea of doing this, we were presenting a workshop at Chautauqua Institute in Western New York, and people kept saying, do you ever do anything on your own, or are you just here? And we were all friends from grad school and went, we could do something, and bought a couple of bottles of wine and sat around saying, what would be a meaningful title for this? And it was like, writer's block, around the block, and then we're all three middle-aged women. We've all been around the block. Let's see how that works. And we, so, I mean, we kind of were going through that. But I think that, I mean, I do love the and I was trying to remember who said it. It basically said there is no such thing as lower, as writer's block. Just lower your standards.
Yeah.
Just that's. So I mean, I wish I could remember. I mean, I have to look for that, and or somebody feed it into your phone today and tell me, because it was a great little piece of advice. But I do think that that's probably. I mean, it's a comical way of saying what usually I do. When I get stuck, I realize what's happening is that I'm trying to do something great instead of just doing something. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot of, the writing down the bones, free writing. I do a lot of reading other poets, and I have particular ones that I'll pull off the shelf and go, okay, I need some time with her, and just read until I start to envy it so much it makes me want to do something. So this was the collection that came just before Beholder. It's Inventory, and so I want to start with what was the last poem in Inventory. This is called, there were two title poems in here, so this is Inventory 2, My Mother's Owls. Most have no value, not even sentimental. Long before she died, my mother lined them up as she lined up her grandchildren, instructing each child to choose 2 or 3 as keepsakes. Stuffed owls, pottery owls, glass owls, not hand-blown, but from Woolworths. Owl charms, owl pins. She had been a hard person to buy for. Just be nice to me all day, she'd say, her difficult-to-fill order for every birthday, until she finally freed us. Started a collection when she was well into middle age. Owl earrings, owl pillows, throw them all away. The order when she was finally made to see her lymphoma was not, indeed, some minor blood disorder from which she would recover. For God's sakes, they're just things. This may be 2 weeks before the memorial service, not even her ashes given to us to inter for 2 years, her body donated to a medical school. You are such a pack rat, she'd say to me. One day, I swear, you will be on one of those TV shows, digging your way out of your own house. 15 years since, and I still hear her owls, in 2 boxes in my basement. I save what I can save. This is called Made in America. In this home, the fine-boned china is made to be smashed, flung against the wall, or tossed into the fireplace, shards sprayed, legacy shattered, splatter those years we saved to make those down payments, I say. History, not placed above on a high shelf, far from the paws of stray hands and curious fingers of small man-children. History that isn't admitted for its fragile lines before long. That's at your feet. Another need for a dustpan. Sweep the lore of the last war, the one before it, into the trash can, and let's have another. Then raise a bud. Pour your facts into cheap plastic cups and pile the used ones up in landfills. We are the family who buys all of our dishes new and our thoughts at resale shops. No worries, says the paterfamilias. I can always get more, where that one came from. She plants butterfly bushes, but what will flutter in? The monarchs are disappearing. Their long flights from Mexico to Pacific Grove, their sojourns to Cape May. Something about the changing currents. Or humans fucking with the climate, her friend Vincent says. He says, we all focus on the big things, but watch. It'll be a bunch of little losses that do us in. Bumblebees going, the monarchs, things are disappearing. And she remembers suddenly the autumn of ladybugs, Dorset, Vermont. Her mother felled the brutal winter before. The ladybugs appeared on the shutters and windows, door of the rented New England salt box, and the locals, without lifting a brow, said, oh yeah, happens every year. Used to be way more of them, while the shingles gleamed, beaded, sequined, insects clinging to the sunny side of the house. The bugs lasted maybe 2 days before moving on, though she found stragglers. A few dried corpses into November. Crushed, their brittle wings trailed red dust across pages of failed elegies. Monuments planed by rain, names lost to weather. When did etched in stone come to mean forever? Year's end, she lights a candle for her lost mother, the wick flickering in slight breath, her window panes unglazed, the flame a firefly trapped in a jar. And fireflies, Vincent's saying, who sees them anymore? A few specimens in shrubs, 1 or 2 some nights, 3 or 4 a season, someone inevitably singing out, "Look, lightning bug." "Yeah," he says, "remember when it was just, oh yeah, lightning bugs. Must be summer." Rebecca expects butterflies. We dream little houses. We dream little houses of sand on sky on pinwheels, Lego sets of little houses as petals of pink flower, black and white amid red ripe tomatoes. Rebecca paints houses with little hands. I collage little houses, glue them into every landscape, because every landscape needs glue these days. I am building collage houses because everywhere now are the sounds of tearing down. Rebecca digs in the sand, unearths clam halves, presses one to the small perfect shell of her ear, and claims she can hear the ocean. She gathers rocks at the breaker line. I think of David, wonder where, as she grows, she will sling her stone. Each caterpillar she rescues from the wheel of our car and places back into the woods will denude another oak. You can't hear the sea in a clamshell. I won't tell her. She says she is Wonder Woman. She expects butterflies. Already moth holes dot the umbrella we crank open over the patio table. Sunlight bullets its not quite shaded surface. Rebecca sees tiny spirits dancing. But this is assignment. Tell me the 3 most important stories of your life, the teacher says, as if she says, tell me what you had for lunch. And I think the obvious. I was born, my children were born, and someone I loved died too young. Surreptitiously, I list other stories. Small moments under sunlight, a food fight with my sister Pam, coleslaw slung at one another one summer day, our parents, who remembers where, and washing cabbage out of each other's frizzy hair in the outdoor shower, 2 rinses, a third. Or smaller moments under lamplight, our mother on a straight-back chair between thin twin beds, reading Mary Poppins to us, chapter by nightly chapter, that particular humid summer. Even the big moments are populated by smaller stories, a crowd of images that circulate and collide, chat each to each, clink glasses like those guests who drift into the cocktail party you never wanted to give, some with a Cosmo in hand, some bourbon, neat, and just keep pouring, how they kept arriving the night after, word getting around, Pam's son, gone? The boy's bulldog, aimless, wandering, eating potato salad off drop paper plates, then groaning. All the people showing up at the door, an epic array of bagels in hand, all seeking something I knew I couldn't give, and the soundtrack of those stories, Pam's incessant questions, where did I put, or who was, or what kind of God would, and the siren wail I heard and later learned was, my sister, my sister, my sister, and from my mouth.
Well, thank you all so much for coming and talking about poetry with us, Liz. I'll see you tomorrow.